Welcome to the Business Mechanics Show. This is your host, Vaughn Sigmund, and today we're going to talk about why leaders must be careful of being too hands-off. As a leader, it can be tempting to take a hands-off approach with your team and allow them to figure things out on their own. However, this can lead to a number of detrimental outcomes for both the team, the organization, and you as a whole. And in this podcast, we'll explore some of the common symptoms that indicate when a leader is too hands-off and provide some insights on how to avoid the pitfall. I see it far too often, and many managers who are moving from manager to leader have unknowingly fallen into this ineffective habit. And I want to bring some awareness to how you are holding yourself back and how it's affecting your team. Let me give you some examples of what you're undermining here. When you're too hands off, team members are going to struggle with understanding what they're supposed to be doing and how to do it. And you're thinking they should just be able to figure it out, take the initiative and figure it out. And if you're saying that on a regular basis to either your boss or a peer or someone in your life, that I wish they could just figure it out. I wish my team had more initiative. Maybe because you're a little too hands off. Because this hands off approach is leading to a lack of clarity and direction, which ultimately results in wasted time, wasted resources, frustration on their part and your part because we're doing things over and over. We're fixing too many things. We're going off in too many directions. And to avoid this pitfall, you as a leader need to set clear goals and communicate your vision frequently to your team members. And additionally, you should be available to answer questions and provide guidance as needed because many of your team members don't have the critical thinking skills to figure it out on their own. They need you. You're the expert. So stay involved. Second thing that is created by being too hands-off is a lack of coordination. Without your involvement and guidance, your team may end up working in silos, and that's a bad thing. They may end up competing with each other rather than collaborating. They may begin working in a silo and competing with other departments within the organization, creating inefficiencies, conflicts, missed opportunities, lost revenue. And to promote collaboration, teamwork, leaders need to encourage open communication, facilitate open regular team meetings. During these team meetings, progress can be shared and challenges be addressed, regular check-ins before we get too far into the mistake. Course correct. How frequent those meetings are, depends on how big the project or the expectation is. But it's never hurt anybody that I know of to check in daily at your stand-up meeting, or maybe at the end-of-day meeting that you have. You are having those, right? That's how you gain continuous improvement. Sometimes your lack of involvement, being too hands-off, creates too much initiative, and they overstep authority. Because when they're left to their own devices, there's a risk that many take actions beyond what they're approved to do, beyond their authority. And this can lead to confusion and may result in legal or financial repercussions for the organization. And to prevent this from happening, You as a leader must clearly define each team member's role, responsibility, the protocols, and their authority limits. And most importantly, just have the protocol and understanding the culture of how decisions are made and how actions are taken. Know their limits. Being too hands off also ends up in a failure of coordination. I'm getting ready to do another podcast on micromanagement, but while micromanaged teams may be afraid to coordinate with other teams, a team without proper guidance or a hands-off manager, one that is too hands-off, may lack the knowledge or awareness of the importance of coordination. They may not know how they're conflicting with others in the organization outside of their team, outside of their department. Almost every organization has a symbiotic relationship between sales, manufacturing, shipping, accounting. All these different departments come together, create a great customer experience. And if they're out there just doing their own thing, without your guidance, without your instruction, without them understanding, you may create duplication of effort. You may be wasting resources. Certainly, you're going to miss some opportunities. And to avoid this, you need to encourage open communication between teams and provide the resources to help your team members understand how their work fits into the symbiotic or the bigger picture. They need to understand how they impact others. It's up to you. You may find where your team is focused on the wrong priority. Without clear direction, your team members may pursue solutions or initiatives or approaches that are not aligned with the company's strategic goals or mission. And boy, does this waste time, does that waste resources. And to ensure that your team is focused on the right priorities, it's important for all leaders to regularly communicate strategic direction, regularly communicate goals, provide guidance, and create the understanding how team members' work contributes to the company's objectives. When a boss is too hands-off, it can lead to a variety of outcomes within the team and the organization. And these outcomes that I just described affects the team's overall performance and certainly morale. And let me give you some examples of some outcomes that you may have seen or may be experiencing if you're too hands-off. Do any of these sound familiar to you? Reduced team productivity. Your team's productivity can suffer without clear guidance, regular input from you. Your team may be struggling to understand priorities or direction, leading to inefficiencies, delays, missed deadlines, missed goals. Are you seeing communication breakdowns? See, a lack of regular communication from a leader can lead to misunderstandings, misinformation, spreading within the team. We're confused. They also may fail to adapt to change. Many hands-off leaders experience this. They give general instructions. They don't check back in. They're not involved enough. And then when changes happen, this can lead to the teams being very slow to adapt to a new challenge or change or protocol or practice or process within the organization. Often creates many missteps, mistakes, frustration on their part and your part because they're going to think to themselves, does anybody know what the hell's going on around here? They hate having to do work over again as much as you despise them doing work over again. You may have compromised team cohesion. The team may be lacking cohesion and a sense of unity without your regular involvement in team building efforts and being proactive. And again, they're going to be wondering, who's in charge around here? When are they going to get their S together? It's being said if you're too hands off, believe me, because they're conflicted all the time as to what they're supposed to be doing, how they're supposed to be doing it, when they're supposed to be doing it, who's supposed to be doing it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like I mentioned earlier in this podcast, often it will create strains with other departments. I see this far too often. And this erodes the relationship, the teamsmanship with other departments, or even external stakeholders like consultants or contractors. And you're going to suffer due to these delays, breakdown in relationships, and a lack of clear direction and communication from you creates these strained relationships. And often you see lower morale, lower engagement, because your employees feel unsupported. They may feel undervalued, that you don't care enough to keep them informed, give them the proper instructions. That leads to low morale, which leads to lack of motivation, lack of engagement, which leads to increased employee turnover. When your employees feel neglected and unguided, or they're not getting the professional growth that they require, they feel stifled, they may seek opportunities elsewhere. And that leads to higher turnover rates. Because they're thinking, why am I putting up with this BS? I don't need this. Always remember, people join companies, but they quit bosses. So always be aware of that. You may also be experiencing a poor quality of work. See, without your regular oversight, without your regular feedback, redirection, the quality of work produced by your team declines. It's because they're lacking their standards, clear standards, or understanding their expectations. Daily stand-ups, end-of-day stand-ups, regular weekly meetings, one-on-ones, all these communications. Yes, it takes more time, but you get a better byproduct if you hold them effectively. And if you're missing deadlines or you're missing targets, teams that are being managed by someone who is too hands-off, they struggle to meet deadlines. They struggle to hit targets because they lack prioritization due to this lack of oversight. And guess who gets maddest about that? The boss, you. And often the boss, who is too hands-off, blames it on the team. It's not the team's fault. It's the leader's fault. There's no bad teams. There's only bad leaders. And you may be seeing conflicts within your team, because when that boss isn't out there with it, without that authority figure, listening and being involved and redirection and guiding and handling situations, when you're not involved enough, conflicts between employees often arise because they have opinions. They have different opinions because there's a lack of guidance. There's a lack of understanding. And they all have their opinions on how to approach a task or approach a project. This creates a lot of dysfunction in your work environment. And it can also be in two hands off, can often create a lack of innovation, a lack of creativity. Your hands-off approach can stifle all this because your employees are less inclined to take risk, or even propose new ideas or share their opinions. Because they will often, when the boss is too hands-off, because they've got the opinion, you've created the perception, you don't give a damn. So why should I even bring something up? Or you're not around enough, they don't have the relationship with you to offer their opinions, their thoughts. So they often will not share those opinions, and especially they won't ask questions. And passive aggressiveness ensues. Because in their head, the perception you've created is, why should I care if my boss doesn't care? Never around. Be aware of that. Also, if you're struggling with being able to promote within your organization, if you're constantly having to go to the outside to hire talent, supervisory talent, management talent, sometimes that's due to a lack of a hands-on approach, a properly balanced hands-on approach, because there's decreased employee development. You're not aware of who the talent is because you're not involved with them enough. You may have your favorites, but that may be due to personality, not to their ability to perform a job at a high level, at a high functionality. Be careful of that. You need to know who your talent is. And how do you know who your talent is? You're out there and you're watching, you're involved, you're talking, you're mentoring, you're coaching. And by doing all that, you're providing growth opportunities and awareness on your part of who my best people are. It's super important for you to find a balance in your leadership style if you feel like you might be too hands-off. Improve your level of support and guidance. Empower your people, but you got to inspect what you expect. You want them to take initiative. You want them to make decisions, but you need to be there to catch them if it's a mistake. Catch it before it becomes too much. And your lack of involvement will give them too much of a runway to mistakes. And again, converse with micromanagement, too much or too little involvement. There's a balance you have to strike. Whichever way it might be, it'll have a detrimental effect on your team dynamics, your organization's success, and ultimately your success, your career, unless you're the most popular with the boss, your career can be stifled. If you're really interested and you think, yeah, I might be too hands-off, how do I fix this? I happen to have some ways. Here are some steps to correct any of your bad habits around being too hands-off. First of all, you need to start with a self-assessment. You need to be introspective and understand your leadership style. If any of these things that I've talked about previously ring true, you need to reflect on that. And if you're getting any feedback from peers, your boss, team members, reflect on that too. Think about comments that they've made and where you may have cast them off as whiny. You might want to come back to that and take it seriously. See, you want to lead by example, and you want to demonstrate the behavior and work ethic that you seek. And they need to see you setting the tone. Inspect what you expect, display the behaviors that you expect. Be transparent, but be consistent. Almost every time when I'm interviewing someone and ask them about the best boss they've ever had, this word consistency comes into the conversation. Trust comes into the conversation. And being too hands-off erodes trust. being too hands-off creates a lack of consistency. And if you're not getting feedback, you need to seek feedback. If you're wondering if you're a little ambiguous as to whether you are too hands-off, too hands-on, let's start asking for some feedback from your team members, from your superior, from your peers, and look for areas of improvement. Rest assured, if you're not well connected, if you're too hands-off and you're not getting feedback, you're going to have a difficult time knowing what you need to work on. You need to be well connected with your team. That means being involved with your team. And being involved with your team builds trust with your team. And when they trust you, they can be honest with you. All the asking in the world won't get you the answers you need if you don't have a professional connection with your team, if you're not involved enough. Because they're not going to tell you the truth. You're the boss. They're not going to tell you their opinions, no matter what. So don't fool yourself with that one. So don't waste time, your time, their time, anybody's time, asking your team for direct developmental feedback unless you've got this great relationship with them. And that's very rare, people. Very rare. What's better, what's more effective, and assuredly you're going to get the feedback you need, which I've told multiple stories about how this was so positive to my development back in the day, is you need to adopt a 360 feedback process where other managers, your peers, your boss are all giving you regular anonymous feedback. Your direct reports, your peers especially. And if you want to find out more about how to adopt a 360 feedback program, I've got one that's inexpensive and powerful. I'll put a link in the show notes for the TalAssure 360 feedback. It's amazing. It's miraculous. I can't say enough good things about having these kind of programs. Let's talk about it if you want to introduce it into your organization. But moving on. Sometimes when you're not involved enough, you're too hands-off, you're not setting clear expectations. So you need to clearly communicate your expectations regarding goals, projects, outcomes, timelines, et cetera, et cetera. You want to avoid confusion. How do I do this? Always close every meeting, whether it's with a group or an individual, with this following question. Take the last few minutes to make sure you do this. Okay, y'all, what did we decide to do here? And have them explain back to you what you're expecting. And I bet you they will often repeat and have correct all of about 50% of what you discussed and you felt like you instructed them on. That's about all they're going to retain. And if you don't ask that simple question, you're going to get the wrong outcomes. You're not going to obtain the outcomes you seek. Just ask that question. Okay, what did we decide to do here? What are you going to go do? How do you understand this? Have them repeat it to you. Then I know how much they retained. Then I know how to add to the information, remind them of what they may have left out. But if I don't ask that question, I'm oblivious to it. And that's where the mistakes come from. Really simple. Very few leaders do it. And you're going to need to increase engagement. You need to make a conscious effort to be more involved in team activities, meetings, the decision-making process. Don't just leave it to them. Go figure it out. Get your butt out of your office and manage by walking around. Get out there and touch people. Not literally. Are you inspecting what you expect? Are you visible? Do people have access to you? Are you out there offering guidance, support, answering questions? Especially in the initiation phases of a project and any point during a project or a month of sales or manufacturing process at the points of critical decisions. And yes, you want to empower your team to make decisions and take ownership, but you want to be available to offer support and guidance and redirection when needed. They're going to appreciate that. They don't want to make the mistake anymore, and you want them to. And then while you're at it, while you're off your butt and out there walking around, engaging with your team, catch them doing it right. Talked about this in last week's podcast. And when you catch them, tell them you caught them and how much you appreciate it. Recognize and reward your team. Reward and acknowledge their hard work and achievements, even if it's just doing their job. That's rocket fuel, y'all. Now, as I talk about being more involved, being out there and being available, there's a fine line you can cross. So you got to figure this out, and it takes some practice, but you've got to balance autonomy, which you want them to have. You want them to have empowerment and autonomy, but you also have to get yourself involved with some oversight. And you need to find the right balance between giving your team the empowerment and maintaining adequate oversight. Yes, you need to inspect what you expect. And as you progress as an individual in your leadership development, more involvement, you're going to be earning trust. And trust begets trust. And it creates a safe space for team members to share ideas and sometimes take calculated risk with your knowledge. Because when you're too hands off, they may take calculated risk. They're going to be very dysfunctional, going to undermine other things. Got to be careful with that. So with all this, you need to improve your communication. You need to work on your communication skills. But Vaughn, I'm a great communicator. Maybe. Communication is a really broad topic. And I'm going to just plant this seed about enhancing your communication channels with your team. Regularly update them on organizational changes, achievements, project statuses, any relevant information. Talk to them regularly in your daily stand-ups or your end of the day meetings. Make them feel part of something bigger. And as always, they must know and be aligned with the company's mission. And you regularly talk about it. And then as part of all of this, you need to implement regular check-ins with the team and individuals on the team. Schedule it. Get it on your calendar. Stay informed. Don't allow your busyness to take you away from this important part of your leadership. Because the more involved, the more you're one-on-one, more it's formalized, more it's a dialogue, and you're asking questions, you're seeking opinions, you're sharing ideas with each other. Ask a lot of open-ended questions. Again, seeking their opinions on just a wide variety of work-related topics. You're building a relationship. You're building trust. You're building likability. And you're also helping them, if you're asking open-ended questions and you're listening, you're not doing all the talking. You need to always adopt the 80-20 rule in these kind of interactions. They do 80% of the talking. You ask the questions, do 20% of the talking. But you want them to create an improved set of skills around critical thinking. So you need to practice active listening, so that you're understanding your team members' perspectives, concerns, getting their suggestions. And if you want help with your own critical thinking skills, I'll put a link in the show notes to download my critical thinking skills sheet. It's been really popular. And it'll help you guide your way through asking open-ended questions and creating a better dialogue to draw out what you seek. And by improving their critical thinking skills, you know what you're doing? You're promoting their professional development. You're getting to know them better. You're going to know who your smart ones are, who your most innovative ones are, who your best leaders are, potential leaders are, and you're going to help them grow professionally. And I encourage you, train, have a regularly scheduled training session on your calendar every single month. And it can be on anything work-related, industry-related, but regularly be training them. They love it, as long as it's trained properly. But schedule it, stick to the schedule, treat it like a doctor's appointment. You can't miss it. Maybe have a monthly lunch and learn with your team. It costs all of a pizza to get that done. I used to love having lunch and learns with my team. I learned so much. It was so beneficial to me. Get involved, eat with them. And then you need to also make sure that you're providing regular constructive feedback because you want them to grow. But it needs to be constructive. It needs to be on topic, and they need to be open to it. If you don't have the relationship I'm talking about, they're not going to be open to it. You're just blah, 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 like Charlie Brown's mother. And also understand there's not a one-size-fits-all leadership style. And if you're too hands-off and you don't understand the temperament, the behavior style, the communication style of each of your team members, you're not going to be able to adapt to the required level of involvement and behavior and communication to their needs. In order to adapt and adopt, you must know their individual needs. That means you need to get to know them. Hopefully, you have a DISC profile on them. Go to my website, check out DISC. Let's get your team DISCed so that you have that valuable information. I'm going to wrap things up on this topic by implementing these steps and best practices I've talked with you today in this podcast. You as a leader can transition from any of these bad habits you've got that have made you too hands-off to being a much more effective and balanced leader where you're going to be engaged, your team's going to like you more, respect you more, thus they're going to be motivated more.